Hi, my name is O for YouTube videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian. I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. A lot of them are about the It Ends With Us fallout, and this one is one of those because there is a new legal document in the case, and we're gonna read it. This is the amended version of Blake Lively's complaint, so a lot of the information is the same, and I tried not to read too much of the stuff that we're already familiar with as I went through the document. But there are some pretty big new adjustments, so let's just go ahead and get into it, because this is basically just a let's read the document together video. Plaintiff Blake Lively brings this action for damages against Wayfarer Studios LLC, a Delaware limited liability company, Justin Baldoni, Jamie Heath, Steve Sarowitz, It Ends With Us Movie, Melissa Nathan, the agency group PR, Jennifer Abel, Jed Wallace, and Street Relations Incorporated, a California corporation. Jed Wallace is the new addition here. Introduction. Are you confident enough to listen to the women in your life? To hear their ideas and their solutions, to hold their anguish and actually believe them, even if what they're saying is against you? And will you actually stand up and do something so that one day we don't have to live in a world where a woman has to risk everything and come forward to say the words, "Me too"? Justin Baldoni, Why I'm Done Trying to Be Man Enough, 2017. Plaintiff Blake Lively brings this lawsuit because she was unlawfully retaliated against for coming forward and reporting sexual harassment that occurred against her and others on the set of It Ends With Us, the film. Defendant Wayfarer Studios is the owner of the film. Defendant Justin Baldoni is the co-chairman and co-founder of Wayfarer and also served as director, executive producer, and actor in the lead role of Ryle Kincaid in the film. Ms. Lively played the leading role of Lily Bloom in the film. At all times during the production, editing, and promotion of the film, Mr. Baldoni was Ms. Lively's boss. For years prior to the release of the film, Mr. Baldoni portrayed himself as a leader of the male feminist movement, writing books, hosting podcasts, and holding TED Talks on the topic. In reality, however, Mr. Baldoni's public persona is a stark contrast to his private behavior, which is replete with hypocrisy, misogyny, and retaliation. In public, Mr. Baldoni gave the appearance of taking responsibility for the fact that he had unconsciously been hurting and silencing the women in his life, and implored men to be man enough to shut the hell up and listen to women. He claimed that he wanted to end toxic masculinity, acknowledging his own toxic behavior by admitting, "There is a woman or two that I in some way made feel uncomfortable by saying something or doing something that was chauvinistic or sexist. There is 1,000,000% probability that that exists," and that he wanted to say he was sorry and would do better. Mr. Baldoni echoed this narrative while marketing the film. In an interview on CBS discussing the release of the film on August 7th, 2024, he claimed, "I want men to stop asking the question, why do women stay? I want men to take accountability. I want men to hold other men accountable." At his own moment of truth, when forced to confront women he had made uncomfortable on his own set, he trivialized their concerns and failed to take accountability for the effects of his behavior, whether intended or not. And when faced with the predictable consequences of having created a toxic set, namely that the cast did not want to appear alongside him in public, rather than holding himself accountable, Mr. Baldoni hid behind his billionaire friend and retained publicists, crisis managers, digital media strategists, and litigators to mount a sophisticated and well-funded retaliation campaign that sought to bury and destroy anyone that challenged his brand. That campaign has succeeded beyond Mr. Baldoni's wildest expectations. In fact, the defendant's actions have created such a toxic climate of online vitriol against Ms. Lively, her friends, other members of the cast, and various fact witnesses that all of the above have received disturbing threats. One fact witness known to publicly support Ms. Lively recently received a written threat indicating that the witness's family would be sexually assaulted and killed unless the witness agreed to make a statement and give the truth. This type of climate was the predictable, if not inevitable, result of the retaliatory campaign launched by the Baldoni Wayfarer parties both before and after the litigation began. This dangerous climate of threats, harassment, and intimidation fueled by the defendant's retaliation campaign has required Ms. Lively to alter her personal and professional life and to take steps to protect innocent bystanders rather than exposing them to further harm. Thus, this amended complaint does not refer to certain witnesses by name, nor does it provide screenshots of their text messages. Importantly, however, these witnesses have given Ms. Lively permission to share the substance of their communications in this amended complaint as contained herein, and they will testify and produce responsive documents in the discovery process. Okay, I'm going to continue with this new introduction because it is so good, but I also want to point out the vast difference between this and Baldoni releasing those fawning messages from Isabel Ferrer in his complaint to try to make her look like she was some fickle little fool who had betrayed him when she didn't want to appear with him during promo. I've been calling attention to the fact since we got our first complaint here that Blake was attempting to push for better working conditions not just for herself, but also for the other actors on set, and this amended complaint really further confirms that. And unfortunately, my prediction is that rather than people realizing that this was something bigger than just Blake, instead, everybody will be speculating on which unnamed actress is which, or saying that the fact that they're not named is an admission that this is all made up or whatever, and that that's why they haven't said anything in public yet. Caveat for Jenny, who definitely has supported Blake, although that's not convenient to anybody's narrative. And also, I think Jenny specifically called Blake a leader when she did support Blake, which is very interesting with this further information that we get. This is a sexual workplace harassment claim. I've been saying that all along. Anybody who's selling you a different narrative around this is lying either because they fail to grasp that or because they know that there's more money in spinning a different narrative around all of this. There's also more information given as we get further into this complaint about things that these other actresses have said, though they're not named. We will get to those, but let me just continue with the introduction first. Ms. Lively brought this lawsuit because she was one of the women or two that Mr. Baldoni 1,000,000% made uncomfortable on the set of the film. As detailed in her opening complaint and below, Miss Lively was disturbed by the fact that Mr. Baldoni spoke about his pornography addiction, divulged information about his sex life, made derogatory, degrading, and sexual comments, described his own genitalia, improvised intimacy that had not been rehearsed, choreographed, or discussed with Miss Lively in advance, and added graphic content to the scene, including multiple new scenes with nudity and a chaotic and violative birthing scene for which he cast a friend as her OBGYN, among other things. But Ms. Lively was not the only one who was uncomfortable on set, and Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer knew it. After Mr. Baldoni learned that he had caused Ms. Lively and others to feel uncomfortable, he turned his TED Talk and feminist advocacy on its head. He did not hold himself and other men accountable, or take his own advice to be confident enough to hold their anguish and actually believe them, but instead used a louder voice to silence Ms. Lively and anyone else who might speak up. That louder voice, amplified by publicists, crisis managers, digital media teams, and lawyers, has sought to mislead the public into believing that Ms. Lively did not experience sexual harassment by portraying her as a powerful bully who fabricated claims of misconduct in order to seize control of Mr. Baldoni's movie. This narrative is false and nonsensical on its own terms, completely at odds with Mr. Baldoni's confession to his crisis manager on August 30th, 2024, that Ms. Lively is the kind of person who genuinely believes she's right and that all of this is unjust, and is breathtakingly cynical coming from a man whose public brand is built upon a pro-feminist facade that urges others to listen to and believe women. More importantly, the defendant's false narrative crumbles under the indisputable truth that Ms. Lively was not alone in complaining about Mr. Baldoni and raised her concerns contemporaneously as they arose in 2023, not in connection with some imagined power play for control of the film in 2024. The experiences of Ms. Lively and others were documented at the time they occurred, starting in May of 2023. Importantly, and contrary to the entire narrative defendants have invented, Mr. Baldoni acknowledged the complaints in writing at the time. He knew that women other than Ms. Lively also were uncomfortable and had complained about his behavior. I promise the further we get into the complaint, there will be more skimming and less just straight up reading, but this is all kind of new so far, so I just want to make sure that those of us who don't have time to sit and read it actually get across what's coming in that's new here. I know not everybody stays up all night when a new legal document drops in this case, but I certainly do. They do spend more time laying out how long Blake's concerns about her harassment on set have been documented, starting here. On May 24th, 2023, Ms. Lively confided in a text to a woman who was a mutual friend of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, "I was going to invite you to set tomorrow. These people, whoa, it's like HR nuts today, the both of them. I wasn't expecting that turn. I mean, it's been present, but today I came home and cried." Ms. Lively describes Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath as creeps. Like, keep your hormones to yourself. This is not mine. I don't want it. I don't want you, gaze or words or tongue or videos of your naked wife. Yeah, it's shocking. Clowns. A few days later, on May 26, 2023, Ms. Lively reported her concerns regarding unwelcome and inappropriate behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, the chief executive officer of Wayfarer and producer of the film, to Sony employee Angie Giannetti, the film's representative for its distributor, Sony Pictures Entertainment. Over the following 3 days in May of 2023, another female cast member reported her own concerns regarding Mr. Baldoni's unwelcome behavior to both Mrs. Giannetti and one of the film's producers. Notwithstanding that female cast member's considerable reservations with coming forward, she nonetheless spoke up and conveyed her feelings that the work on the film was suffering as a result of Mr. Baldoni's behavior. Ms. Giannetti shared those concerns with Wayfarer. On June 1st, 2023, Mr. Baldoni responded to that female cast member in writing, acknowledging that he was aware of her concerns and that adjustments would be made. Notwithstanding that promise, Wayfarer took no actions to investigate this reported conduct, nor did it implement any protections at the time. Just 1 week later, on June 8th, 2023, the same female cast member told Ms. Lively about her growing concerns with the conditions on set and that she found it difficult to talk to Mr. Baldoni. Ms. Lively responded that, "I know I find it really hard to speak to him. I try to cover it with busyness, but not sure that covers what's going on." Later, another female cast member confided to Miss Lively that she too felt uncomfortable on set. All of this occurred and was documented in writing almost 1 year before the editing of the film began. As a result of guild strikes, production of the film shut down on or about June 14th, 2023. In the midst of that shutdown, on October 13th, 2023, Ms. Lively confided in a text to a female cast member that she was dreading going back to our film. "I keep getting hits of the experience in really upsetting ways." The female cast member expressed empathy for Ms. Lively and confirmed similar feelings. I feel like I've said this in almost all of the videos whenever it comes up that Baloney and company didn't actually expect to have the all-hands meeting the way that they did, despite it being one of Blake's return to work conditions, that I just absolutely can imagine how being on strike and being away from this kind of workplace would make you feel increasingly uncomfortable about going back, and that you might want to, I don't know, flex your power as a worker when you've just been on strike, which is also flexing your power as a worker. I've always been really thrown by this whole, like, well, we thought we were coming back from break, but she wanted to threaten to walk away if we weren't nicer to her. Like, okay, of course she was. Anyway, I just really appreciate this complaint in terms of how well written it is, how well it lays out the argument, and selfishly, how validated it makes me, personally, okie dokie YouTube videos feel. And I can't believe I never even thought to point out this next part because it is so obvious, but this point that they're about to make in the next part I'm going to read about how none of Lively's demands were actually about control of the film, beautiful, amazing. These lawyers deserve every penny Blake's paying them, and I'm sure it's a lot of pennies. Before returning to production following the guild strikes, based on Wayfarer's complete failure to investigate or address any of the complaints conveyed by Miss Lively and others, Miss Lively decided to speak up and require that Sony and Wayfarer agree to a set of protections to ensure a safe set for all of the cast and crew. Thus, in mid-November 2023, the parties agreed in writing to implement a list of protections enumerated in a contract entitled Protections for Return to Production, attached hereto as Exhibit A, which included 17 provisions designed to require Wayfarer to cease the on-set behavior of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. These provisions were designed to remedy the misconduct that Ms. Lively and others had reported earlier that year. One of those provisions required an all-hands meeting to confirm and approve a plan for implementation of certain protections that will be adhered to for the physical and emotional safety of Ms. Lively, her employees, and all cast and crew moving forward. Another provision required that an experienced producer, Todd Black, be brought in to oversee production and ensure that the requested productions were adhered to for the safety of all cast and crew members. Importantly, none of the requested protections were in any way tied to Ms. Lively's creative input on the film and were made months before any discussions regarding the cut of the film. At that moment in time, with the completion of the film uncertain, Ms. Lively did not request, nor did she receive, any creative rights, editing rights, credits, or any other role on the film beyond her roles as an actress and executive producer. Everything she requested, as laid out in the document, was designed to ensure the safety and well-being of the cast and crew. In other words, at the precise moment in time when Ms. Lively had maximum leverage prior to resuming production, she did not use that leverage to obtain anything other than protections for herself and others to ensure a safe work environment for all. The notion that she did all of this as some sort of Byzantine plot to take control of the movie at some future point, which she did not do in any event, is absurd, and there is not a shred of evidence to support it. Okay, and just in the interest of not reading the whole thing out loud, after receiving the document, Wayfarer responded. They acknowledged that Ms. Lively had concerns, differing perspectives, blah, blah, blah. We find most of them not only reasonable, but also essential for the benefit of all parties involved. And then Ms. Giannotti texts Ms. Lively on November 29th, 2023. So glad Todd is in it now and overseeing everything, but wanted to check in, offer anything I can. I know this has been beyond challenging to say the least. We at Studio want to support you best we can. And then they have the all-hands meeting on January 4th, 2024, prior to resuming production of the film. I feel like I have read this list of meeting attendees a bunch of times. Baldoni, Heath, Miss Giannetti, Miss Sachs, Todd Black, Miss Lively, and Ryan Reynolds, who Lively chose as her representative. A choice which Miss Lively had the right to exercise under the November agreement, given that the meeting was about repeated sexual harassment and other disturbing behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. During the January 4th meeting, the parties discussed in detail the inappropriate conduct that Ms. Lively, her employees, and others cast and crew experienced at the hands of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Ms. Lively read the list below in its entirety, and after a discussion, all parties present agreed that the outlined conduct would cease. And this is that list of no mores that Baldoni claims in his complaint was not given to him. At the end of the January 4th meeting, having discussed at length the details of concerns that had been expressed by Ms. Lively and others, the parties agreed to implement and follow the protections for return to production to ensure the film could be completed, marketed, and released safely and successfully, and it was. Production of the film resumed on January 5th and concluded on February 9th, 2024. As discussed below, the film has been a resounding success. Again, a lot of this is already familiar, but I read a bunch of it out loud, so I might as well use it, even though I definitely did not know how to say Byzantine, I just kind of guessed. More about the other cast members feeling uncomfortable in this, though. As the cast and crew returned to production on January 14th, 2024, Ms. Lively reassured a female cast member that as a result of the protections that Wayfarer and Sony had agreed to, you don't need to hug anyone this time, to which the female cast member responded with gratitude. Ms. Lively continued that he won't touch you, or shouldn't. I don't think he or Jamie will. Ms. Lively expressed her belief that it would be a professional set and we're getting good work. Leading up to and in connection with the release of the film during the summer of 2024, Ms. Lively and fellow cast members promoted the film in accordance with the marketing plan created and delivered by the film's distributor Sony, which is summarized in the talking points attached hereto as Exhibit C. Ms. Lively and other cast members were under a contractual obligation to engage in media, press, marketing activities, and render promotional services in accordance with the marketing plan. The marketing plan directed the cast to focus more on Lily's strength and resilience, as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence. This doesn't look super new, so I'm going to skim again here. Yeah, in the days leading up to the film's release, Baldoni abruptly pivoted from the film's marketing plan and the types of publicity activities in which he had previously participated. What the public did not know was that Mr. Baldoni and his team did so in an effort to explain why many of the film's cast and crew had unfollowed Mr. Baldoni on social media and were not appearing with him in public. To that end, he and his team used domestic violence survivor content to protect his public image, as described in further detail below. Other cast members contemporaneously observed Mr. Baldoni's pivot as it was happening. For example, a female cast member lamented to Ms. Lively in a text on August 10th, 2024, that Mr. Baldoni's marketing pivot was jeopardizing the success of the film, and opined that the pivot would not work because it would eventually come out that Mr. Baldoni was using domestic violence commentary to cover his own behavior. What the public did not know was that this was the beginning of a multi-tiered plan that Mr. Baldoni and his team described as social manipulation designed to destroy Ms. Lively's reputation. And then we talk about Steve Sarowitz, Wayfounder's co-founder, co-chairman, and leading financer, multi-billionaire, who divulged to a witness at the film's New York premiere on August 6th that he was prepared to spend $100 million to ruin the lives of Ms. Lively and her family. We've got some more information this time around. It says that was not the only time Mr. Sarowitz made such a threat. Later in August, even though the film had turned out very well and Wayfarer had made a lot of money on it, Mr. Sarowitz confessed to another witness, an individual who was working with Wayfarer on an unrelated project, that if Ms. Lively or Mr. Reynolds ever cross the line ever, then I will go after them. He declared, I will protect the studio like Israel protected itself from Hamas. There were 39,000 dead bodies. There will be 2 dead bodies when I'm done. Minimum, not dead, but you're dead to me, so that kind of dead, but dead to a lot of people. If they ever get me to that point, then I'll make it worth their while because I'm going to spend a lot of money to make sure the studio is protected. Like, I don't even know what to say about that. Just, I feel like there's no, I couldn't even warn you. Like, if I had said, I'm about to say the wildest fucking thing that Sarowitz could possibly say, you wouldn't have been able to prepare yourself for that. So I apologize for just kind of dumping that in. But my God, how are the stands going to justify that one? Are they just not going to bring it up or what? Footnotes here, when asked about this comment, Mr. Sarowitz's counsel confirmed that his client is prepared to spend whatever necessary to defend Baldoni, Wayfarer Studios, and himself. And second one here says, as with other witnesses not named in this amended complaint, the individual to whom Mr. Sarowitz made these statements has given Ms. Lively permission to share this incident and will testify to its effect. So then now we're moving into the smear campaign itself. Supported by Mr. Sarowitz's financial backing and militaristic worldview, Mr. Baldoni and his Wayfarer associates embarked on a sophisticated press and digital plan in retaliation for Ms. Lively exercising her legally protected right to speak up about their misconduct on set, with the additional objective of intimidating her and anyone else from revealing in public what actually happened. And then we've got him following the recommendation of the publicist Jennifer Abel. Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni retained a crisis communication specialist named Melissa Nathan and her company, the Agency Group. We already know all of this. Miss Nathan delivered a proposal to Mr. Baldoni, which included a website to discuss, full Reddit, and we're going to talk about the Reddit as soon as we take a break on reading the document. I got some stuff to say about that. And then, again, a lot of this is similar language to the first complaint because this is an amended complaint and not a full new one. The plan went well beyond standard crisis PR. What Miss Nathan proposed included a practice known as astroturfing. I'm pretty sure this is the exact same paragraph that was in the original one, which, no problem with that. It's a good paragraph. And we clarify here, Ms. Lively obtained the communications set forth in her original complaint through legal process, including a civil subpoena served on Joneswork LLC. In statements to the media and in public filing, in this court, certain of the defendants and their counsel have baselessly claimed that Ms. Lively or her counsel engaged in criminal alteration of these materials. That is false. Jonesworks produced the communications to Ms. Lively in connection with a lawful subpoena, and the documents included within this complaint are attached in the format in which they were produced, subject to the subpoena, with limited redactions of names and phone numbers to protect third parties' privacies. At all times, Ms. Lively has understood the produced documents and communications to have been lawfully obtained, maintained, and produced by Jonesworks. Ms. Lively included all excerpts of communications as produced, which, on information and belief, were produced in the data extractors program, Cellbrite, default font and format, including, for example, the absence of text emojis in that production format. Images such as emojis, when available in a preserved screenshot, for example, were attached as produced. But I thought it was the missing emoji heard round the world. They told me that that changed everything. They promised me that that upside down smiley face completely and totally changed the context of the entire conversation, even though it didn't. Also, yeah, Aaron was right about this. Aaron was saying in the comment section of my videos about this from the first time that these text messages were coming out, I think, that probably whatever archiving software they used simply did not archive the emojis, because emojis do not, in fact, completely change the context of a conversation and whether or not somebody seems culpable, especially when it's the upside down smiley face, which many of us have agreed in my comments, like, is a sarcastic emoji, but not an I am lying in everything else I'm saying and you can't take me seriously emoji. And then we've got the scenario planning document that was circulated on August 2nd. We've got Baldoni expressing concerns that the plan was insufficiently aggressive to protect him. Not sure I'm feeling the protection I felt on the call text. And then, of course, infamously, later that day, Ms. Abel and Miss Nathan exchanged the following text messages expressing that Mr. Baldoni wants to feel like Miss Lively can be buried. Miss Abel and Miss Nathan agreed that, of course, they would do just that, but could not say so in writing. We can't write it down to him. We can't write, "We will destroy her." Imagine if a document saying all the things that he wants ends up in the wrong hands. We've got the Hailey Bieber "This is what we would need" screenshot, to which Miss Abel responded that she had just spoken to Melissa about this, about what we discussed last night for social and digital. Focus on Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, with a reassurance that Miss Lively would be destroyed and buried. Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni directed Ms. Nathan and her team to actively engage in their retaliatory social manipulation campaign. And again, I'm going to read this part, even though I do think I have read it in the past video about her complaint. Just people have asked what I'm talking about when I talk about Jed. The retaliation campaign relied on more than just publicists and crisis managers spinning stories. They also retained a Texas-based contractor named Jed Wallace, who weaponized a digital army around the country from New York to Los Angeles and beyond to create, seed, promote, and engage with content that appeared to be authentic on social media platforms and internet chat forums. The Baldoni Wayfarer team would then feed pieces of this manufactured content to unwitting reporters, helping to make content go viral in order to influence public opinion and thereby cause an organic pile-on. To safeguard against the risk of Miss Lively ever revealing the truth about Mr. Baldoni, the Baldoni Wayfarer team created, planted, amplified, and boosted content designed to eviscerate Miss Lively's credibility. They engaged in the same techniques to bolster Mr. Baldoni's credibility and suppress any negative content about him. On August 10th, the day after release of the film, Ms. Nathan's team reported that they had started to see a shift in social, due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative against Ms. Lively. That same day, Ms. Nathan noted that as part of this shift, the majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, lol. And then, again, we've just already read a lot of this. We have and socials are really, really ramping up in his favor. She must be furious texts. We have it's actually sad because it just shows you have people who really want to hate on women. I know it's sad, but then, don't be a C word. She fucked herself by doing the unfollow thing and insisting no photos together. I would like to talk about that. We will continue to read through this amended complaint, but I'm here to give commentary. Let me give some commentary about she fucked herself by doing the unfollow thing and insisting no photos together. So, I mean, we very much have known since Blake's complaint that all of this is retaliation, but this text from Abel just makes it so clear. I saw somebody point out on the BaldoniFiles subreddit that it seems like Baldoni was undone by being unfollowed and then gray rocked / ignored. And I agree, but I'm also just so caught up on this gleeful punishing of a woman for failing to live up to some arbitrary measure of kindness to this man who harassed her and made her feel uncomfortable at work. And also, you know that if she hadn't unfollowed him, Lion Brian Friedman would be running around saying, well, how harassed could she really feel? Because she still follows him on social media, or that she still followed him until the release of the movie, etc. I don't know, man. It's really just, we wouldn't have had to hit her so hard if she didn't put her hands up to block her face sort of thing. It is nasty, nasty work. Let's just continue with this introduction, though. Defendants have admitted that on August 12, 2024, in the midst of a massive sentiment shift on social media that was engulfing Ms. Lively and others with a flood of negative comments, Wayfarer was asked to issue a statement to help correct the situation by accepting accountability for the production it oversaw. But rather than doing so, Ms. Nathan advised that issuing such a statement would be a career killer for Mr. Baldoni, who she urged to lawyer up and fight. Less than 1 week later, they again bragged about how they had shut down stories regarding HR complaints on set. On August 15th, 2024, Ms. Nathan remarked that this went so well, it was genius. So, okay, we have the 4 majors standing down on HR complaint. As their own words reveal, the purpose of this social manipulation plan was twofold. It aimed to both conceal the pattern of harassment and misconduct by Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and Wayfarer, and retaliate against Ms. Lively by battering her image, harming her businesses, and causing her and her family severe emotional harm. Millions of people, including many reporters and influencers who saw these planted stories, social media posts, and other online content, had no idea they were unwitting consumers of a crisis PR, astroturfing, and digital retaliation campaign created and funded by Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer to hurt Ms. Lively. That is precisely the goal of an astroturfing campaign, to light the fire and continue to stoke conversations secretly, blurring the line between authentic and manufactured consent, and creating viral public takedowns. In just days, the retaliation campaign had resulted in the viral spread of hateful, threatening, and derogatory content directed at Ms. Lively, her family, and other female cast members, as well as harassment and cyberbullying of the same. Online hate and vitriol found its way onto the social media accounts of much of the cast of the film, Ms. Lively, Mr. Reynolds, and numerous businesses associated with them. By August 14th, 2024, a female cast member texted Ms. Lively, expressing feeling concerned and helpless about the online narrative. A different female cast member wrote to Ms. Lively on August 14th, 2024, to ask whether she knew if Sony could help her address the cyberbullying she was experiencing, which was getting nastier and more difficult to cope with by the day. As described further below, many individuals and businesses other than Ms. Lively herself began to experience vitriol, harassment, and cyberbullying around this time, demonstrating the obvious falsity of defendants' self-serving insistence, since Ms. Lively's first complaint in this action, that they engaged in no proactive measures and that this viral spread of online hatred was entirely the result of Ms. Lively's own remarks and actions during the campaign for the film. Indeed, these facts are not in dispute. Mr. Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties have already admitted that Ms. Lively raised concerns multiple times. They admitted that they created a plan in case she made her grievance public, in which case they planned to plant stories suggesting that Ms. Lively was a bully and weaponizing feminism. They admitted that their team was able to bury anyone. They admitted that they bragged and laughed at how negatively the narrative had shifted against Ms. Lively and how successful they were at confusing people. They admitted that within hours of laying out their plan, they started to see a shift on social, due largely to Jed and his team's effort to shift the narrative. And they did all this despite the knowledge that Ms. Lively, quote, genuinely believes that she's right and that all of this is unjust, end quote. And then we have, I think these are new texts. Justin texting, okay, thank you. Yeah, I just know her personality, and this is the kind of person that genuinely believes she's right and that all of this is unjust. Response, she fully does, I know it. Justin, so those people seek justice at any cost. That's why I have a hard time believing she's done, but trusting you and grateful for you. Response, she looks abominable if she does anything against you. She knows it. And then Justin, male feminist, responds with a bunch of hearts. Despite all of this, they claim that their plan was never implemented, and somehow the universe simply organically provided them with the exact result they planned for, at the exact time they wanted it, using the exact narratives they developed. The problem for defendants is that they put their plan for an untraceable campaign in writing, and the evidence shows them commenting on the success of their plan as it unfolded. In her opening complaint, Ms. Lively noted that she is informed and believes Mr. Baldoni and his associates have additional astroturfing plans that they have prepared and are ready to launch at a moment's notice. That is precisely what occurred starting the moment Ms. Lively sent a cease and desist letter to defendants on December 20th, 2024, including with it a copy of her administrative complaint filed with the California Civil Rights Department, the CRD. Upon receiving the cease and desist letter, defendants leaked the administrative complaint to certain hand-selected publications to get ahead of it, gave numerous statements to the press, including blatantly false and defamatory factual allegations, and began a near-daily media and social media blitz aimed at discrediting Ms. Lively. Ms. Lively's longtime publicist, Mr. Reynolds, Disney, the New York Times, and more. On information and belief, all defendants actively participated in this enhanced retaliation campaign. Defendants' counsel threatened numerous lawsuits to sue Ms. Lively and others into oblivion, and proceeded to file 4 lawsuits in 3 jurisdictions with fantastical damages of hundreds of millions of dollars of each. On information and belief, defendants' counsel has threatened both fact witnesses, neutral commenters, and publications with lawsuits for doing nothing more than speaking out or publicly reporting unfavorable information about the defendants. In sum, with his own misconduct exposed, Mr. Baldoni refused to take accountability for his own actions when asked. He eschewed his own advice to just shut up and finally listen to the women in our lives, and he did not have the courage to hold their anguish and actually believe them, even if what they're saying is against you. Instead, he called upon Mr. Sarowitz to fund a legal, press, and astroturfing campaign to ensure that Ms. Lively would be forced to risk everything to come forward. Damn. The irony of Mr. Baldoni's response to Ms. Lively speaking out is that his own publicist and co-defendant Jennifer Abel just expressed her own dislike for Mr. Baldoni, declaring, "I can't stand him, he's so pompous," and predicted that he would seek to blame others if necessary to protect himself. On January 14th, 2024, Ms. Abel wrote that he doesn't need a retreat, he needs to be humbled. When this movie flops, he's going to try to blame every person around him for it. She continued in another message, He may fire us, because even if we put together an amazing campaign, it's not going to change the fact that he's so unlikable and unrealistic as a leading man. There's no chemistry with him and Blake. You and I both know that she will be resistant to promote this movie, and press will be reluctant to do anything with Justin without Blake being part of it. So there. Those are my thoughts. On December 21st and 22nd, 2024, a female cast member who had also complained shared with Ms. Lively that she couldn't believe they could do this to her, and the fact that this was happening to Ms. Lively was frightening to her. As laid out in this amended complaint, the Baldoni Wayfarer-led takedown of Ms. Lively was the intended result of a carefully crafted, coordinated, and resourced retaliatory scheme to silence her and others from speaking out about the hostile environment that Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath created. As such, it was not only unconscionable and a breach of contract, but also illegal under both state and federal law. Ms. Lively brings this action to hold defendants accountable for the ongoing retaliation, threats, and harm they have caused Ms. Lively, other cast and crew, and all of their families. And then we've got the parties here. Blake Lively, Wayfarer, Baldoni, Heath, Sarowitz. It ends with us. Melissa Nathan, the agency group TAG, Jennifer Abel, Jed Wallace. Jed Wallace is President, Director, and Secretary of Street Relations, Inc., formerly known as Street Relations, LLC. Mr. Wallace is an individual who resides in Dripping Springs, Texas, and who has described himself as a self-employed PR consultant who offers crisis mitigation services. And Jed Wallace has also recently filed suit against Blake Lively. And then we've got the factual allegations, and I do feel we are pretty familiar with the factual allegations at this point. You're welcome to go watch my other videos about this if you are not. I will not be reading all of these out loud just because this video is already going to be long enough. As I have already mentioned on this channel, I am not a sports person, but I do have to imagine that this is how fans of the Philadelphia Eagles felt during the Super Bowl. Like, I do feel like my team is winning, at least in terms of having the stronger argument. So from there, we move into some of the specific complaints. Here, like in the original complaint, we go over how things like improvised intimacy and filming without a nudity rider violate best practices on a set, and that without those protections, Baldoni improvised, like the multiple kisses that were unscripted, and that there was no intimacy coordinator present to stop him. We have already discussed the leaked footage of the dance scene on this channel, but I want to read from the relevant portion of this amended complaint, so let's go ahead and do that. On another occasion, Mr. Baldoni and Ms. Lively were filming a slow dance scene for a montage scene, meaning that none of the sound recorded while filming the scene was meant to be used in the film. Music was intended to play over the action. Nonetheless, microphones were live to pick up the room tone, but not conversations or dialogue to be used in the film. The scene in the script specifically described dancing without dialogue and did not include any intimate conduct or kissing. Exterior, bar, night. Lily and Ryle slow dance in the bar, patrons around them drinking and watching sports, completely in their own world. Mr. Baldoni did not provide notice or seek consent for any intimacy in advance. Instead, Mr. Baldoni chose to spontaneously improvise the scene while the cameras were rolling. During the filming, Mr. Baldoni repeatedly leaned in towards Ms. Lively, attempting to kiss her, kissing her forehead, rubbing his face and mouth against her neck, putting his thumb to her mouth and flicking her lower lip, caressing her, and telling her how good she smells. None of this took place while Mr. Baldoni was in character as Ryle, because both the intimacy and dialogue departed from what had been agreed to in the script. Ms. Lively was uncomfortable and kept leaning away and repeatedly suggesting and then begging that their characters should just talk. She tried to use levity and creative pleas to deflect the unwanted touching, hoping to get through the scene in a way that maintained a professional boundary without antagonizing Mr. Baldoni. The video footage of the scene shows Ms. Lively to be trapped, having to appear as though her character was happy and in love while the cameras were rolling. Ms. Lively did not want to film additional takes on the scene, but continued to participate, to be a team player and support the production in real time while simultaneously expressing and holding physical boundaries against Mr. Baldoni's advances. Ms. Lively even referred to Mr. Baldoni as a sociopath at one point during the exchange. Notwithstanding Ms. Lively's attempts at humor and levity, her words, actions, and body language all evince her lack of consent. When Ms. Lively later objected to this behavior, Mr. Baldoni's response was, "I'm not even attracted to you." I also think this footnote does a really fantastic job at dispelling some of the Darvo they've attempted around all of this, getting people to talk about how Blake herself also kissed Justin during takes, because of course she did, because it was a movie about that. But anyway, I'm going to read it and continue. The fact that Ms. Lively varied the numbers of kisses in other scenes in which the kissing was scripted in advance does not justify Mr. Baldoni's improvisations or his attempts to add graphic sex scenes into the film. In other scenes, the kissing was consistent with the plot. It had structure and blocking, and most importantly, it was discussed in advance and was mutually consensual. There can be flexibility in such scenes, but it must be within appropriate boundaries, and the key is advanced planning and consent. Mr. Baldoni acted without planning, without consent, and grossly outside of acceptable boundaries. He made it personal and repeated even after Ms. Lively spoke up, and became defensive and dismissive when challenged, no matter how politely she mentioned it. In January of 2025, the defendants, through their attorney Brian Friedman, released this video to the media, apparently hoping that the mere act of releasing the footage would mislead the public into believing that it shows nothing abnormal or proper. But the footage by itself corroborates Ms. Lively's description of the scene to the letter. That is not just Ms. Lively's view. And we have already read from that unrelated intimacy coordinator who proved us right in a previous video, but that Hollywood Reporter article with Mia Shader is referenced and quoted, and it says that Brian Friedman actually sent legal letters threatening Mia and the Hollywood Reporter following the publication of that article, which Lively and her team had no prior knowledge about. There's also more information about the intimacy coordinator and the obviously false claim that Blake had full-on refused to meet with the intimacy coordinator, so I will read you that as well. Ms. Lively complained about inappropriate behavior as early as May 2023, which occurred without an intimacy coordinator present, and which ultimately led to Wayfarer and Sony agreeing with Ms. Lively that the consistent presence of an intimacy coordinator was not only reasonable but essential. Contrary to defendants' assertions elsewhere, Ms. Lively did not refuse to meet with the film's intimacy coordinator. She said she did not need to meet with her before production started because there were no intimate scenes in the immediate future, so they could talk once production began. Ms. Lively did have a call with the intimacy coordinator during preparations. These conversations happened close in time to the filming of the relevant scenes. Elsewhere, Mr. Baldoni has blamed the intimacy coordinator for supposedly writing graphic new sex scenes, including foreplay and orgasms, and talking about a clit. Wayfarer amended complaint. But Ms. Lively consented to the sex scenes in the script as written at the time she signed on to the film, and Mr. Baldoni did not have consent to rewrite and add sex scenes, even if he did so with an intimacy coordinator. The purpose of the intimacy coordinator is to work with the actors to establish the appropriate boundaries based on what is in the script, not to rewrite the script to add more sexual content to satisfy the director's demands. And that brings us back into things we have already, again, I feel, discussed at length, like Baldoni adding the sex scene for the younger version of Lily, played by Isabel Ferrer, and telling the actors that their performance was hot, asking if they had practiced before. We also have a text message that Blake sent in July following the incident in the car where Justin Baldoni was waxing poetic about how he hasn't always listened when previous partners told him no. Later in July 2024, in connection with another discussion, Ms. Lively recounted this consent story to a female cast member in a text exchange. It's crazy how above reproach they feel. It's like he said to me about his previous sexual encounters when we were in my car with my assistant and my security. He said, "Have I always asked for consent? No. Have I always listened when they said no? No. People show you who they are. Believe them the first time." In fact, Mr. Baldoni publicly acknowledges that he has struggled with consent. He echoed similar language to the words he spoke to Ms. Lively in the car ride described above in a podcast interview, in which he admitted that he had crossed boundaries and lines in my teens and 20s with respect to obtaining consent, a flaw which he blamed on his early exposure to pornography. You start to think that is what women want, and in porn, as we know, no means yes or try harder. And then the complaint talks about Baldoni and Heath talking about their sex lives and prior pornography addictions, and then we finally get more detail about the claiming to speak to her dead father thing. Mr. Baldoni engaged in other behaviors that were shocking and emotionally distressing. For example, he claimed he could speak to the dead, and on several occasions told Ms. Lively that he had spoken to her recently deceased father. On one occasion, when he claimed to have spoken to Ms. Lively's dead father, a person whom Mr. Baldoni had never met, Ms. Lively attempted to deflect the comment with humor, telling Mr. Baldoni, "Let him know he owes me $40. Mr. Baldoni replied, "Wait, does he really?" Ms. Lively was shocked that Mr. Baldoni was pushing the conversation further and replied with another attempt at humorous deflection, stating, "Oh God, no, he owes me so much more than that." Mr. Baldoni then closed his eyes, put his hand on his heart, and said, "I was leaving my apartment this morning, and I reached into my pocket, and there was $40 in there that I did not put there. This exchange deeply disturbed Ms. Lively, and it was not, as defendants have since claimed, limited to Mr. Baldoni simply claiming to pray for her father. I want to quickly run through one of my other favorite responses that Blake's team put into this complaint as far as the kind of shit that Team Baldoni have been running around doing. I love this entire section where they are just laying things out in the simplest terms, but I also really can't believe that even just based on the comments I get on my own video, they really did have to explain this, even though it feels so common sense to me. Defendants have claimed that Mr. Baldoni's description of female cast members as sexy was justified by the fact that Ms. Lively also sometimes used the word sexy on set. This claim displays a stunning lack of understanding as to how context informs the appropriate versus inappropriate use of language. The word sexy is not inherently inappropriate, but it can be inappropriate in certain contexts. Ms. Lively or Mr. Baldoni using the word sexy in a creative space related to the plot or in reference to a character is not problematic. What was inappropriate, and what Ms. Lively objected to, was her employer, Mr. Baldoni, personally describing her as sexy out of character. It also clarifies that one of the other complaints made by another actress on the film was in May, so long before the protections for return to production were in place. This section here also, regarding Blake being barged in on while she was breastfeeding, really perfectly mirrors what anyone with any understanding of consent has been saying since Baldoni's team presented that one-off invitation as fair game, so I'll read that too. Throughout filming, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath invaded Ms. Lively's privacy by entering her makeup trailer uninvited while she was undressed, including when she was breastfeeding her infant child. Ms. Lively often had to work while breastfeeding, which she felt comfortable doing so long as she was given the time and space to cover herself. She did this frequently because she was not given breaks to feed her baby. But Ms. Lively did not expect or consent to anyone entering her private spaces while topless, exposed, and vulnerable with her newborn, or during body makeup application or removal. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath both showed a shocking lack of boundaries by invading her personal space while she was undressed and vulnerable. Defendants have claimed these intrusions were Ms. Lively's fault because she texted Mr. Baldoni on one occasion that she was just pumping in my trailer if you want to work out our lines. This misunderstands the difference between a woman pumping on her own terms, having taken the necessary steps to make herself comfortable, covering herself and ensuring the conditions are appropriate for the task, and walking in on someone without notice or permission while they are breastfeeding or otherwise in a state of partial undress. The critical distinction is consent. Ms. Lively's one-time invitation was neither free license to join her immediately in her trailer, nor was it a general invitation to freely walk into her trailer at any time uninvited. And it certainly was not licensed to enter Ms. Lively's trailer when she refused consent. The fact that Mr. Baldoni, who has repeatedly preached the importance of consent while giving media interviews or in public speaking events, now claims otherwise with respect to his own behavior displays breathtaking hypocrisy. Also, another person besides the women and anybody who has supported Blake who is listed as receiving hate is the trainer, the one who was correctly loyal to Blake and not to Justin, and told Blake about Baldoni's inquiry about her weight. The complaint reads, in later messages sent to his team, Mr. Baldoni referred to Ms. Lively's trainer as a damn spy and sought to plant stories to portray his concerns as being motivated by his lower back pain. Ms. Lively was not alone in her view that Mr. Baldoni's discussion with her trainer was uncomfortable and inappropriate. In fact, on January 29, 2025, following Mr. Baldoni's $400 million lawsuit against Ms. Lively and others, Ms. Lively's trainer edited the caption of an Instagram post he had originally posted on July 25, 2024, of himself and Ms. Lively and his wife, to share his views on this issue publicly. He wrote that since he had originally posted the picture, there have been negative comments on this post, negative comments sent to my wife, and, believe it or not, negative comments sent to my children. He explained that Justin Baldoni is not my client. I created a complimentary program for him as a favor to a client. He noted that he had helped him find a good coach, and after an uncomfortable conversation, communication ended. Okay, and this one is going to be a lot of reading because there is a lot more information here, I think, about the HR complaints and how they came about, especially now that we know that there were other ones. So let's get into that, and let's also bear in mind that Baldoni's team successfully convinced all of the major media companies that there was no HR complaint because they just lied. Wayfarer, Mr. Baldoni, and Mr. Heath received or were aware of a number of HR grievances regarding their conduct. They admitted as much from day one. For example, on the first day of filming, while attempting to hug Ms. Lively's employee, Mr. Heath said, "I don't even know if we're allowed to do this. It's day one and we have an HR report already." Contemporaneous messages with witnesses prove that Ms. Lively's concerns about Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath and others' concerns began early in the pre-production and production process, long before the editorial process began. Because of the lack of protocols, Ms. Lively initially struggled to find a way to navigate the increasingly troubling behavior to which she was subjected on set. On or about May 23, 2023, during a particularly difficult day on set, she and a female cast member talked to each other about how uncomfortable they were both feeling. That same cast member later reached out to Ms. Lively by text to express appreciation and relief to be able to commiserate about their shared experiences. Ms. Lively, upset with the inappropriate working conditions to which they were both being subjected, thanked her for her support in speaking up, writing, "Thank you for taking the time to say this, and also for taking the time at your lunch. I felt untethered today and you grounded me. I'm sorry for what you've experienced, and I wish I would have been there to witness it for you. And not that you need me to, but I sure would have loved to run my mouth about it. Thank you for not only witnessing me, but for coming in with such eloquent and safe backup. You were able to be bold without being inflammatory, which is such a tightrope, and I really appreciate it." On May 24th, 2024, both Ms. Lively and the female cast member discussed how they were both feeling uneasy on set that day. Ms. Lively confided that she felt like she needs to say something tonight after wrap, but that she's not sure how to navigate it, to which her cast member responded by offering words of support. And then again, we have that Ms. Lively confided in another woman. She was going to invite them to set, but she came home and cried. "I don't want your gaze or words or tongue or video of your naked wife. Yeah, it's shocking. Clowns." We already read that earlier, but again, that's new, so I'm repeating it. Meanwhile, Ms. Lively and a female cast member discussed a plan to speak with Ange Giannetti, the Sony executive assigned to the production. When Ms. Lively reached out to Ms. Giannetti, who was supportive, Ms. Giannetti texted Ms. Lively that "what I did want to review/discuss feels very, very small in light of today's news. I'm so sorry, calling you in moments." In that conversation with Ms. Giannetti on May 26, 2023, Ms. Lively told her that she wanted to file an HR complaint about both Baldoni and Heath's misconduct. Although she was sympathetic, Ms. Giannetti told Ms. Lively that Sony, as the distributor of the film, was not empowered to oversee physical production, which included Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath's behavior on set, and that such concerns must be raised with Wayfarer, the studio responsible for the production. Ms. Lively was concerned with this response because Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath were the chairman and CEO of Wayfarer, and Mr. Baldoni was the director of the film. Ms. Lively did not believe that either Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath would investigate their own alleged misconduct, and that disbelief was proven by subsequent events. In the meantime, following through on her prior text, the female cast member also had her managers contact Ms. Giannetti to discuss that cast member's own discomfort with behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath and its negative impact on the work. The remainder of the text exchange shows how both women shared concerns about speaking up and the potential consequences of doing so. Ms. Lively shared that she needed to tread carefully to salvage some degree of chemistry and camaraderie with Justin, who's not only my director but love interest, and we're not even a third of the way done with filming. The two women then recounted their discomfort with their experiences with Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, including one incident in which Mr. Baldoni secretly recorded them, and another in which he made an unwelcome remark about the female cast member's wardrobe. Ms. Lively noted that Mr. Baldoni once asked her if he crossed a line, and when she said yes, he made a joke that he must have missed the sexual harassment meeting. Ms. Lively and the female cast member discussed various examples of their uncomfortable and inappropriate interactions with Mr. Baldoni, and on May 28, 2023, Ms. Lively explained that her concerns were not just with Mr. Baldoni's behavior, but the way that Mr. Baldoni behaved after being confronted with his line-crossing behavior. He keeps referencing it, or disconnects entirely, or gets snippy and impatient as a director. He was so huffy after the sexy thing, I felt awful for saying something. That same day, Ms. Lively continued by observing that both she and the female cast member are not people who can't take a joke, or who can't work or understand blue. We're not that fragile. Referencing Mr. Baldoni, she said, You just can't record people without asking. You can't speak to people sexually while not in character or while talking about a character. And if you overstep, you move on. It's the weirdness after that makes it feel bad. Like if we speak up, the vibes on set get funky and the work suffers. On May 29th, 2023, the same female cast member texted Ms. Lively to recount a conversation with one of the film's producers about the cast member's own concerns with Mr. Baldoni's and Mr. Heath's conduct, and that producer agreed that the situation needed to change. Later that same day, the same producer also reached out to Ms. Lively to say that she had spoken to Ms. Giannetti and confirming her conversation with the female cast member about what had been occurring on set. Ms. Lively thanked her for reaching out and replied that they would catch up later that week. The next day, June 1st, 2023, that producer reached out to Ms. Lively again to praise her. Ms. Lively responded with gratitude and thanked the producer for taking the space to step up where we need it. The producer, in turn, thanked Ms. Lively because she helped make the space for them to finally start listening to me, so thank you. After unsuccessfully attempting to raise concerns with Sony, Ms. Lively expressly told Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath that there were serious HR problems on set. Mr. Heath responded that they knew, implying that someone had mentioned to them that Ms. Lively had raised concerns. In response, Mr. Heath told Ms. Lively that he thought she had wanted to see the nude video of his wife. On June 1st, 2024, the female cast member told Ms. Lively that Mr. Baldoni had expressly acknowledged her concerns in writing, stating, "I recognize that the last few days of filming have been difficult, but I wanted you to know that the work is really great and I'm excited for what we're creating. Equally important is that I was made aware of your concerns. I wanted you to know that they are fully received. I hear you, and adjustments will be made accordingly." The cast member conveyed to Ms. Lively that she did not feel the acknowledgement was satisfactory. Ms. Lively agreed. On June 8th, 2023, a female cast member confided in Ms. Lively that she had had difficulty having conversations with Mr. Baldoni. Ms. Lively responded that she too found it really hard to speak to him. "I try to cover it with busyness, but not sure that covers what's going on. I think we're fine. We just have some stories to tell. And who knows, if it wasn't a shit, who maybe we wouldn't have found each other in such an anchoring way." And noted they were survivors with shared trauma. Mr. Baldoni's response to hearing the grievances of Ms. Lively and another female cast member was dismissive. On June 8th, 2023, the female cast member who raised concerns about Mr. Baldoni's behavior told Ms. Lively that Mr. Baldoni had been heard complaining to another actor that, "Dude, I have to tell you something, but I don't want to get canceled or lose my job. You can't say anything on this set anymore." As described above, Ms. Lively and others attempted to raise concerns to Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath regarding certain of the conduct described during filming, but it was futile to ask Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath to address their own behavior, and their concerns were not addressed. Despite receiving multiple detailed reports by Ms. Lively and others about Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath's misconduct, Wayfarer failed to investigate these reports or institute protections for the cast. This is so even though the incidents discussed above, among others, did not take place in isolation, and many, if not all, were witnessed by others. In their January 31st, 2025 amended complaint, defendants admit that Ms. Lively raised concerns directly with Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath as early as May 2023. Their narrative about this complaint is telling. According to defendants, Mr. Baldoni was immediately suspicious of Ms. Lively's concerns, and although defendants cannot point to a shred of contemporaneous evidence backing this up, defendants now insist that they were informed by Sony that any complaints were not sexual in nature, and that Mr. Baldoni sensed that Lively was intentionally manipulating the facts. Mr. Baldoni admits that the way he addressed this was to create an acknowledgement note for someone else to pass on to Ms. Lively, which Ms. Lively found entirely unsatisfactory. Defendants concede that Ms. Lively requested a meeting the next day on June 1st, 2023. Yet, instead of following Mr. Baldoni's own advice to be confident enough to listen to the women in your life, to hear their ideas and their solutions, and to actually believe them, even if what they're saying is against you, defendants mock Ms. Lively by saying she raised a series of grievances that she appeared to have spent the past 5 days overanalyzing, and scrutinized every minor infraction and perceived slight. In sum, defendants have conceded that Ms. Lively raised concerns about their behavior, both to Sony and to them directly, but their response is to retroactively rebrand those concerns as non-sexual and criticize Ms. Lively for overanalyzing perceived slights. By these and other behaviors, Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and Wayfarer engaged in harassing conduct and failed their obligations to investigate complaints of workplace harassment, prevent inappropriate and harassing behaviors on set, and provide avenues for cast and crew members to safely raise concerns to neutral parties so that they could be investigated and appropriately addressed. On or about January 31st, 2025, in the midst of this litigation, and nearly 2 years after Ms. Lively first raised concerns to Wayfarer in May 2023, outside investigation counsel for Wayfarer sent a letter to Ms. Lively's counsel, claiming that they had recently been retained by Wayfarer to conduct a neutral third-party investigation of Blake Lively's complaint for sexual harassment, retaliation, failure to investigate, prevent and/or remedy harassment, and aiding and abetting harassment. Wayfarer's outside investigation counsel asked to interview Ms. Lively and to have an introductory call with her counsel first. Ms. Lively's counsel engaged in an introductory call with Wayfarer's outside investigation counsel and another investigator on February 12, 2025. See letter from Ms. Lively's counsel to investigation counsel, attached here too as Exhibit E. The investigators acknowledged that Wayfarer had a legal mandate to conduct an investigation and confirmed that Wayfarer had not previously conducted any such investigation. The investigators confirmed that 1. Wayfarer controlled the investigation budget and the documents and information that the investigators would receive. 2. The investigation would be attorney-client privileged, and that as the holder of the attorney-client privilege, Wayfarer would have the rights to all the investigators' interview notes, memoranda, determinations, and conclusions, which Wayfarer could keep completely secret if it chose to do so. 3. The Wayfarer Parties Council would have the right to sit in on the investigators' interviews with any of the Wayfarer parties. And 4. It was entirely Wayfarer's decision as to whether the findings of the investigators were memorialized in a written report, and if there were a written report, it would be solely up to Wayfarer to decide whether that report would ever be provided to the cast and crew, Sony, or the general public. The investigators acknowledged having read Ms. Lively's complaint and confirmed that if these incidents occurred as alleged, there are significant problems within the organization that they will have to contend with. Yet, the investigators conceded that they would not be making any recommendations for corrective actions that Wayfarer should take based on the investigation findings, which they described as beyond the scope of their work for Wayfarer. It would be solely up to Wayfarer to decide what to do, if anything. Wayfarer's belated launch of an investigation in 2025 is a damning admission of Wayfarer's failure to investigate events that were reported to Wayfarer in 2023. It also demonstrates the hypocrisy of Wayfarer's claim that it simply wants all of the facts to be released for public consumption. A privileged and confidential internal investigation that is financed and controlled by the same Wayfarer executives who have been sued for sexual harassment and retaliation is not an exercise in transparency, but a sham. This is especially so when litigation has already been initiated that will allow for neutral fact finders to determine Wayfarer's liability based on documents and testimony under oath provided by Baldoni, Heath, and Sarowitz. The Wayfarer parties ignored their legal mandate to conduct an investigation in 2023 when they indisputably became aware of multiple HR complaints, and their cynical attempts to launch a rigged investigation now makes a mockery of their legal obligations. And while it is helpful that Wayfarer has finally conceded its legal obligation to investigate sexual harassment and other concerns raised on the set of the film, Wayfarer continues to ignore its legal obligation to cease retaliating against Ms. Lively for reporting those concerns. I'm going to go ahead and predict right now that we are going to see a ton of shit about how Blake Lively refused to participate in an investigation, and it means therefore that she was not victimized, but I agree with her lawyers that this investigation is very clearly a fucking sham. They definitely could have investigated this at any point in the last 2 years if they wanted to, and I'm sure Friedman wants another talking point about how uncooperative she is. It's pointed out later in the complaint that the EEOC itself says that investigating within just a few months is a late investigation, so them trying to do this now is just, they're banking on the fact that a lot of people who have strong opinions about this have no idea how workplace rights work. As far as Friedman's talking points for people who have no idea how anything works, though, let's talk about their response to the whole goofy, she stole his movie and this is all actually about that narrative, because I think, once again, they laid it out really well. Mr. Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties have falsely claimed that Ms. Lively took over the movie as a self-aggrandizing power play. The defendant's entire accusation would rely on Ms. Lively and others fabricating malicious claims nearly a year before an edit, though Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath repeatedly engaged in inappropriate behavior with witnesses and corroborators in real time. And then, even more complicated, their accusation would have required Ms. Lively to rely on the hope that the Wayfarer parties would sign a document acknowledging and agreeing to cease the detailed and specific misconduct described in her claims, after writing letters of apology to other female cast members 8 months before. And also, most critically, the supposed master plan they absurdly accused Ms. Lively of would rely on the hope that Wayfarer would never, in that 1.5-year process, launch an HR investigation to clear their innocent names, but instead allow their film to be stolen from them. The assertion Ms. Lively bullied her way into edit room is not only false, but it was not even necessary. If she was not happy with the film, she could have easily just moved on to her next project. She had offers for directing jobs before, during, and since the film. If she wanted to direct, she could do that at any time, and without having to deal with the Wayfarer parties, whom she very clearly wanted nothing to do with. The story of the edit of the film is not relevant to Ms. Lively's claims of sexual harassment and retaliation. It is a red herring designed to distract the public away from the grave misconduct by the defendants. The Sony Cut is the film that was chosen to be released in theaters. Ms. Lively led the Sony Cut with their support, working in close collaboration with Sony and Colleen Hoover. And then we have Ange Giannetti texting Ms. Lively about the huge response from the public to the release, calling it a beautiful start and thanking Ms. Lively for her contributions. On August 11th, after the film's release, Sony executive Ms. Giannetti wrote to Ms. Lively, "Blake, $50 million, your blood, sweat, tears, brilliant smarts, heart, and soul in every single frame. My God, it's incredible. Thank you 50 million times, and it's only Saturday night." The story Mr. Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties have told since Ms. Lively filed her opening complaint is completely at odds with their behavior when trying to produce and market the film. Before Ms. Lively sued, Mr. Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties were perfectly happy to exploit Ms. Lively's star power, as well as her access to A-level filmmakers, editors, and more. And, notwithstanding their complaints today that Ms. Lively supposedly seized control of Mr. Baldoni's film, that did not stop Mr. Baldoni from proudly marketing the film as his work on release. Indeed, although Mr. Baldoni privately confessed that he did not even see the final cut of the film until the premiere, he repeatedly and publicly took credit for the film, while Ms. Lively generally downplayed her contributions. The irony of Wayfarer's complaints should be lost on no one. It is Mr. Sarowitz, Mr. Baldoni, and Mr. Heath that have reaped the greatest financial benefits from Ms. Lively's hard work, about which they now complain. The film quickly became Wayfarer's most lucrative project, to the record-breaking tune of over $350 million. Reveling in the financial success of the film they now incredibly accuse Ms. Lively of hijacking, Mr. Sarowitz boasted in one interview that the film was #1 in the country as of August 13th, 2024. It seems, so long as Ms. Lively stayed silent about Wayfarer's misconduct, defendants were content to continue collecting paychecks from the film they now claim she hijacked. It is only once she spoke out about the sexual harassment and retaliation to which defendants subjected her that they decided to attempt to convince the public that Ms. Lively ruined the film. And defendants have done so even though throughout the process Mr. Baldoni engaged in stunning duplicity, praising Ms. Lively to her face and in public while secretly disparaging her in private and plotting to bury her alongside the truth of his own behavior. I am skimming over a lot that I know that we've already gone through, especially as relates to Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel's texts. But one text that I think I speculated about and was right was that Justin Baldoni's "Let's flip the narrative on something Ryan Reynolds said." That was about Ryan having helped script. And let's read this part together. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Sarowitz, along with Mr. Heath, both encouraged and provided input and ideas on ways to negatively influence the narrative against Ms. Lively, her family, and her businesses, as well as suppressing negative press about Mr. Baldoni. For instance, on August 9th, 2024, the film's release date, in discussing certain negative articles about himself with Ms. Abel, Mr. Baldoni stated, "There's no way we can just let this go." On August 15th, 2024, Mr. Baldoni texted Ms. Nathan and Ms. Abel, stating that his business partner, Mr. Sarowitz, suggested flipping the narrative arising from unnamed sources who had made false claims about Mr. Reynolds' involvement in the script of the film, and suggested ways to manipulate those rumors to make Mr. Reynolds appear to be anti-feminist. There was no truth to these claims. And then messages from Justin. No worries. Quickly, my partner Steve asked about flipping the narrative from this leak this AM about Ryan saying script was a disaster and he saved the movie to something about Ryan claiming the female hired was feminist writer, didn't know how to tackle a female film, etc., using their own words against them. Mr. Baldoni stated that this is an easy flip before Miss Nathan indicated that she was already working on a story for Variety that would achieve this goal. The chief problem with these stories was that they were not based on Mr. Reynolds' own words. Mr. Reynolds never said that the script was a disaster and he saved the movie, nor did he claim that the female hired was a feminist writer who didn't know how to tackle a female film. Nor was there any evidence backing up Mr. Sarowitz's proposed line of attack on Ryan Reynolds. And Blake actually reached out to female writer, hired female feminist, whatever the fuck Baldoni called her. Interesting he didn't refer to her by name and just referred to her as female writer in the text. But anyway, he's such a feminist. Ms. Lively reached out to the film's screenwriter, Christy Hall, after she was questioned about an impromptu comment Ms. Lively made about Mr. Reynolds' input on the rooftop scene in the film. Ms. Lively expressed a heartfelt apology that her comment resulted in questions to Ms. Hall, to which Ms. Hall graciously accepted, sharing that she did not take Ms. Lively's comment personally. At this same time, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Sarowitz were scheming with their crisis PR team to find a way to exploit this moment to flip the narrative and paint Mr. Reynolds as anti-feminist. And here's that letter. Hey Christy, I hope you're enjoying the immense success of this weekend and for what it means for stories about women by women in film. I heard you were ambushed at your junket with a question about something I said on the red carpet. I feel awful. I never would have said anything that I thought could be used against you or anyone. I was just proud of my partner and feeling grateful for the ways in which he shows up for me. I believe firmly that two things can be true. In this case, he can show up for me and do great work doing so, and you can do great work which got all of us here. But the media will make things more black and white, and I should have seen that before speaking off the cuff. I was frazzled for a multitude of reasons that you may know something about, or not, but in that moment, all I was trying to focus on was love and positivity, and the key source of that for me is my family, which is why it was a crutch for me to talk about him. I'm mortified with how that translated with regard to you, though. I pride myself in being thoughtful and trying not to step in landmines, but I did. It was such an avoidable own goal, and I'm so sorry for any upset or hurt it may have caused you or left you feeling badly in any way. That was never my intention. I was thinking about audiences loving real life love, and seeing that on screen is inspiring. I should have been holding all of that and you while speaking publicly, and I didn't do that. I'm sorry. I spoke about you during many days of junkets, but of course the one that gets shared back to you is the one where I give my husband credit for the invisible work he did on this movie. I quite literally could not have gotten through it without him, in every way. But that's not your bag to carry, and somehow it was, if even for a moment. We'll hopefully talk more one day about plenty. What it is to be a woman in this industry is messy and painfully not charted enough. I live in New York and would love to get together anytime. Just let me know. There's so much to say, but none of that is for today. Today is a congratulations, a celebration, and an I'm so sorry for any upset I may have caused in an otherwise beautiful moment. Sending you the best, Blake. I thought that Blake's message was really sweet, and also, as I've already pointed out in these videos, the writer has never been the one who's been saying that she's upset by this, just Justin. And listen, I've said this before and I will say it again, though you're still not going to get a 20-minute list of itemized grievances from me. There are a lot of things Blake Lively has done that I wouldn't defend. But her behavior in all of this is not something that feels like something I have to struggle and try to defend. It feels like something I really admire. It feels like a woman who is trying to look out for and help the other women on her set. It sounds like a woman who is advocating for herself, but also for these other women. And that's been consistent since the first complaint. Those of us who have been paying attention have noticed that Isabel was included on those protections. Again, we don't have these female co-stars broken out by name yet, but it's pretty much Jenny and Isabel, right? And the difference in the way that Blake is treating them, the way that Blake has been treating them by trying to be on their side and to be a unit, to be the leader that Jenny described her as, somebody who seems to have been maybe a bit emboldened to stand up for better conditions when it was not just for herself but for other people too, compared to Justin Baldoni is throwing everybody under the wolves and also insulting their intelligence, also saying These people were not smart enough to make up their own decisions based on their interactions with me. They were fooled. They were fooled by Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. On August 10th, 2024, Ms. Lively sent a text message to a female cast member regarding how she was doing, writing that she was both thrilled and so bummed. Him literally hiring bots to attack my character while I promote a movie that he benefits most from financially is a terrible feeling. It's almost impossible to comprehend. That cast member responded by expressing sympathy for Ms. Lively and confidence that the truth would come out. On August 11th, 2024, Ms. Lively received a message from another cast member making observations regarding the evidence smear campaign against Ms. Lively, and the cast was insane. Ms. Lively responded, "Yeah, I am legitimately depressed and heartbroken, like in an immense amount of pain. I'm sorry it's being aimed at all of us, you included." I also thought that it was kind of a real big bummer to see the difference in the way that, like, Blake is trying to be present and show up for these other women in her cast, and the way that the studio responds to her when she's clearly struggling under the weight of this smear campaign being mounted against her. There's also more texts outlined between Blake and other female cast members regarding the smear campaign happening in August. The next day, Ms. Lively commented in a text message to the cast member that it's bullshit about all of us. We know who we are. It's why it hurts so much, because we feel and we're not evil sociopaths. To which the cast member responded in agreement. On August 18th, 2024, Ms. Lively observed that the online hatred and targeted against her was incessant and getting worse. She continued, "Everyone's sort of in shock and no one wants to be the first to hit it head on, so it just gets worse." Ms. Lively noted that at this point she was staying off of social media given how ugly it had become. As this onslaught continued, Ms. Lively was deeply disappointed that neither Wayfair nor Sony had stepped in to correct the record. On September 4th, 2024, she received a text from a Sony executive checking in on her and asking how she was doing. Ms. Lively responded, "I'm not in a good place. This has been deeply painful and I feel so hung out to dry. From production to this PR crisis, no one stepped forward. I wish so much that I was okay, but I'm really not." That executive said, "I know it's been hard and horrendously unfair, and I hope soon you can better take in the incredible film you made that audiences love around the world. It's so rare this happens, and you did that. You will also have $330 million worth of eyeballs watching a film about domestic violence that is so important and affected so many lives for the better. That's because of you." Just made me feel real bad. I just don't like that. Hey, at least you got a lot of money. Jeez. We are nearing the end of the complaint. Again, I have skimmed much of this that is already going to be familiar. If you've watched my whole series about this, you can find a link to the playlist in the description below. You can also find a link to the post where I found this complaint. So let me just, I'm just going to finish reading the rest of this amended complaint, at least the rest of what I read out loud earlier from it. And then we'll come back. We'll talk about that thing about the Reddit that I mentioned earlier. I promise I keep track of that stuff. And then we'll conclude because I spent all day working on this. A relentless media influence and digital manipulation strategy remains at the heart of defendants' campaign. As before, defendants have directly engaged with media platforms to overwhelm and confuse the public's understanding of Ms. Lively's allegations and to drive negative sentiment against Ms. Lively and anyone who supports her or speaks out against Mr. Baldoni. Defendant's strategy is to convince the public that it is Ms. Lively rather than Mr. Baldoni, i.e. the co-founder, co-producer, and director of the film, backed by a billionaire who has pledged to spend $100 million on his behalf, who is the bully perpetrating a media smear campaign. Much of this phase of the campaign has taken place in the form of statements by defendant's lawyer, Mr. Friedman, who regularly issues inflammatory content to media outlets, appearing on any show that will have him, including those hosted by his own clients, and saying anything, whether true or false, that will harm Ms. Lively's credibility and intimidate others from speaking up on her behalf. Those statements, which have been circulated and viewed millions of times, constitute defamation, as well as continued retaliation against Ms. Lively for engaging in the protected activity of speaking up and bringing legal claims against Mr. Baldoni. And then there's also a list of the defamatory statements that Friedman has been making outside of court proceedings. The statements above were published with actual malice because defendants know that the core narrative advanced by Friedman, that Ms. Lively fabricated made-up sexual harassment claims to seize control of the film, is false, As conveyed in a text exchange on August 30th, 2024, Mr. Baldoni and Ms. Nathan both have never doubted the sincerity of Ms. Lively's beliefs regarding what happened on set. In their own damning words, "I just know her personality, and this is the kind of person that genuinely believes she's right and that all of this is unjust." Ms. Nathan responded, "She fully does. I know it." These overtly retaliatory, misleading, and in many cases false statements regarding Ms. Lively have been accompanied by defendants' continuing pervasive content in conferring with friendly media sources to ferret their narrative into the public. Additionally, as before, defendants have continued to pursue their untraceable social media manipulation campaign designed to impact social media algorithms against Ms. Lively. On information and belief, those efforts have continued and accelerated since Ms. Lively's administrative complaint and subsequent federal lawsuit were filed. Defendants have further pursued their public strategy through frivolous litigation designed to create press attention, intimidate others from coming forward, and pressure Ms. Lively to give up her claims. Defendants' counsel threatened to file numerous lawsuits to sue Ms. Lively and others into oblivion, with the intent and effect of intimidating others with information about Wayfarer from speaking up. Defendants have since proceeded to file multiple lawsuits in 3 jurisdictions with outsized damages assertions in each, including $400 million in the affirmative suit by Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer in the Southern District of New York, $250 million against the New York Times, and $7 million by Mr. Wallace and his company in Texas. In keeping with the reverse victim offender approach, defendants' suits echo many of the claims made by Ms. Lively against them, but with allegations fixating heavily on Ms. Lively's supposed motive for her allegations, wresting creative control of the film from Mr. Baldoni. Defendants' course of conduct in their numerous retaliatory lawsuits to date has been rife with gamesmanship, retaliation, and harassment, including in matters as seemingly inconsequential as service. For instance, when Ms. Lively filed her complaint, her counsel reached out to Mr. Friedman, as provided for under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, to ask whether he would agree to accept service of the complaint by email. Doing so is a standard way of avoiding the time and expense of attempting to effectuate personal service on parties to litigation. It avoids sending a process server to an individual's home or office, which can be time-consuming, expensive, and embarrassing for the served individual. Mr. Friedman refused to accept service in this manner, which meant that Ms. Lively was obligated to attempt to serve each defendant personally. Once Ms. Lively did so, again because Mr. Friedman refused to accept the offer to handle service in a less intrusive manner, defendants then used that opportunity to plant misleading stories in the press, criticizing entirely standard attempts and timing that defendants could have avoided if they wanted to, as beyond despicable, a desperate act of ego and privilege, and a new, unforgivable low for Ms. Lively. Similarly, before filing this amended complaint, Ms. Lively attempted to depose Wallace in Texas to investigate the nature and scope of Wallace's role in implementing and carrying out the campaign against her. Mr. Wallace repeatedly evaded and obstructed Lively's persistent efforts to serve him. Worse, Mr. Wallace's counsel made blatant misrepresentations during Lively's attempts to serve him, first agreeing to accept service and later denying such statements were made and refusing to comply with alternative methods of service. On January 23, 2025, the process server received a text message from an associate at Liner Friedman Tatelman and Cooley LLP saying, "The law firm Liner Friedman Tatelman Cooley LLP will accept service for him. Do not try to serve him again. Thank you." Yet Friedman later claimed that my office never agreed to accept service of process of anything, and thereafter denied any arrangement to accept service. After purposefully dodging service for more than a week and failing to take responsibility for his actions, on February 4th, 2025, Mr. Wallace filed a plainly retaliatory lawsuit against Ms. Lively in Texas. While refusing to accept service and weaponizing the results of such refusal, counsel for Mr. Wallace additionally insisted upon pursuing in-person service of Ms. Lively, even though her counsel accepted service and filed a waiver of service on February 7th, 2025. Mr. Wallace's counsel continued to threaten to pursue Ms. Lively with personal service, even though she had accepted service already, unless Ms. Lively's counsel agreed to accept his unwarranted demands, including one fraudulent attempt to gain access to Ms. Lively's property by falsely representing that the process server worked for a food delivery service. The insistence on harassing Ms. Lively and her family with attempts to effectuate personal service has continued, notwithstanding that plaintiffs' prior attempts at service on the evening of January 18th resulted in one of Ms. Lively's and Mr. Reynolds' employees, who was not a party to this action, being followed to the residence in which she was staying by an unknown vehicle with its headlights turned off down a dark road at night, resulting in the filing of a police report. Defendants have weaponized the litigation to further their campaign narrative in other ways as well. For example, defendants have created a website entitled thelawsuit.info on which they have posted their filings that include annotated text messages and finding self-serving chronology from prior to the film's production through the filing of Ms. Lively's complaint. Despite repeatedly accusing Ms. Lively of cherry-picking evidence, defendants never had any intention of posting every single text message, every single document, everything on a website for everyone in the public to read. Instead, the website contains only a selection of self-serving materials that advance defendants' narrative. On information and belief, defendants' counsel has threatened numerous third-party witnesses, journalists, media entities, and others with lawsuits if they speak out against or publish unfavorable information about Mr. Baldoni or any other defendant. At the same time, on information and belief, defendants have continued to push negative and derogatory content about Ms. Lively and her family to content creators, journalists, and others. In sum, defendants' retaliation continues, unapologetic and unabated, using the very same playbook defendants assembled and have relied on since at least May 2024. And then we have Mr. Baldoni retaliated because HR complaints regarding his behavior threatened his feminist brand. We have lots and lots of evidence of the fact that this man brands himself as a male feminist, his "Why I'm Done Trying to Be Man Enough" TED Talk. Mr. Baldoni has previously emphasized that I want men to stop asking the question, why do women stay? I want men to take accountability. I want men to hold other men accountable. He has warned about the dangers of gaslighting and victim blaming, and yet his own lawyer, Brian Friedman, responded to Ms. Lively's complaint in this manner with the following. And Blake Lively, if she was sexually harassed to such a degree in this film, and in this situation, she wouldn't have returned to the film. In sum, Mr. Baldoni's years of investment into his public image as an ally and fierce advocate for women motivated him to employ extraordinary, cynical, and unlawful efforts to bury and destroy Ms. Lively. Contrary to his carefully cultivated public image as a feminist, Mr. Baldoni, enabled by his billionaire friend and co-founder Mr. Sarowitz, has spent the last several months and millions of dollars to ruin Ms. Lively and her family because she spoke up about wayfarers' harassing and disturbing conduct. Ms. Lively, her family, her business, and certain third parties with knowledge about the retaliation and underlying sexual harassment have suffered and been substantially harmed by the Wayfarer Party's ongoing conduct. Online vitriol towards Ms. Lively has continued unabated. For example, on January 31st, 2025, Ms. Lively's personal Instagram, on which she has nearly 45 million followers, was inundated with pornographic content, tagging her account profile handle. In an article titled "Blake Lively Instagram Flooded with Porn Amid Baldoni War," TMZ reported that Blake Lively has been targeted with a massive troll campaign among her legal war with Justin Baldoni. Her Instagram profile is flooded with porn. Meta responded publicly by saying this kind of online harassment is wrong and we condemn it. We are removing the content that violates our policies and we will continue to monitor for additional violating posts. On February 4th, 2025, Amazon Prime Video announced on social media, via collaboration with the film's director, Ms. Lively, and others, the upcoming release of their new movie. The announcement immediately faced a steady stream of comments repeating the false and harmful statements invented and perpetuated in the smear campaign financed by Mr. Sarowitz and executed by defendants. These actions were designed to damage the success of Ms. Lively's new film, which affects not only Ms. Lively, but also the other cast and crew, as well as the distributors of the film. Some comments include, why is Blake Lively's name placed higher than Anna Kendrick's? Is it also her edit? Yes, there's TikToks on this. Because she probably bullied them to do it. Anna hates her too. Instead of taking over others' people project, why don't you create your own project if you want to be project director, producer, wardrobe team, scriptwriter with your own money? This is the most logical query that I'm asking you. Smiley face, smiley face, smiley face. Probably because she doesn't have talent. Shrug emoji. Why would you want to take over someone's movie? The outfits for It Ends With Us. We're so out of touch. No thanks. We don't want to watch bullies like Blake. Wave, wave. Social media posts in February 2025 reflect the same, for example. Fuck at Blake Lively and at Vancity Reynolds. They are nothing but Hollywood losers who thought they could bully and hijack somebody's movie. My theory is she wanted to fuck him, but he rejected her and she didn't like that. And Bry Guy found out and now they gotta save face. Because their life ain't perfect. This vitriol and violence is unlike anything Ms. Lively has experienced in her 20-year career. At no point until the initiation of the defendant's campaign had Ms. Lively or her family experienced anything remotely like the above. The sentiments expressed above are the terrifying result of the money, time, and human resources defendants have poured into creating an environment of hatred against Ms. Lively and her family. This campaign has been devastating to Ms. Lively including by causing substantial harm to Ms. Lively, her family, as well as her businesses and all the people who work at each of them. Unlike Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni, Ms. Lively has been precluded from not only experiencing the success of the film, but also from having the ability to engage further with her businesses, fans, and social media followers without immediately triggering an onslaught of hateful and violent comments. Instead, Ms. Lively and her family have been forced to contend with not only an incessant and wide-reaching negative media campaign, but also violent threats against Ms. Lively and many who associate with her. We've also got more here on the effects of the campaign against Blake in her professional and personal life, comments that were left on her booze brand. The threats and harassment are not limited to Ms. Lively. Any individual with even a tangential connection with the underlying events faces attack and the inevitable emotional consequence of feeling targeted and shamed. As referenced above, other cast members have received threats, online harassment, and floods of comments to their social media accounts. In the days after January 31st, 2025, when the Wayfarer plaintiffs filed their amended complaint, including a 100-plus page exhibit replete with full text threads, including with third parties, one of the individuals whose texts are excerpted received a written communication stating that if the witness did not give a public statement departing from that witness's support of Ms. Lively, the witness's family would face physical harm and sexual violence. These are but a few examples of the substantial harm caused by this malicious campaign, which pervaded and continues to pervade all aspects of Ms. Lively's life. This terrorizing climate is the result of the retaliatory campaign launched by defendants, and the continued harassment and targeting of innocent bystanders is not an accident or coincidence. Ms. Lively never sought out conflict with Wayfarer, Mr. Baldoni, or Mr. Heath, but instead consistently attempted to speak up for a safe and respectful workplace privately, in the hopes of protecting herself as well as the cast and crew without jeopardizing a film that she believed could make a difference in people's lives. In response, Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and those working for them sought to destroy Ms. Lively and anyone else who might dare to speak the truth. Ms. Lively's discovery of the full extent of the retaliatory campaign launched by the Wayfarer parties and their associates left her with no choice. Through the California Civil Rights Division complaint and this action, Ms. Lively seeks to set the record straight, to hold the defendants accountable, and to shine a light on this new form of retaliation so that it will not be used against any others who seek to stand up and speak out against sexual harassment or retaliation. We've got some differences in the causes of action here. We have some of these statements from Baldoni's lawyer that are being included now in the defamatory statements against Blake. And as we already knew, this is a demand for a jury trial, which is actually what both Blake and Baldoni are asking for. Okay, so before we wrap up, just on that whole "we're killing it on Reddit" thing, the pin I told you to put in later, I didn't notice this at all. I didn't even think to check the date that the Justin Baldoni subreddit was created, but somebody on the BaldoniFiles subreddit posted, and they pointed out that this subreddit for Justin Baldoni, like the fan one, it popped up right around the time that this full social and digital campaign was getting started, which is just so suspicious. Nobody gave enough of a shit about this guy for there to be a subreddit about him until there was a woman to like him against. So I just wanted to promote the BaldoniFiles subreddit, not the Justin Baldoni fan one. BaldoniFiles subreddit is where I found this whole complaint amendment. It's also where I found a ton of other information about Justin, and it's one of very few places on the internet that I've seen that's a place I'd actually willingly participate in conversation about this, other than my own YouTube channel. But I am, of course, very, very grateful for all of the opportunities that I do get to participate in conversations about this here on my own YouTube channel. This video was very much just a let's read this together sort of video. I'm obviously nowhere near done talking about any of this, but I also knew probably just enough people didn't have time or a desire to go through 140 pages of this alone and would rather do it here in the nuance corner. So no big overarching thesis this time other than just, my God, I am so glad that she has better lawyers than Amber Heard did. I was actually kind of thinking about taking a week or two off following my Lacey Green video, but I needed to read this amendment anyway, and I process information a lot better when I do it like this, even better than if I just take notes. So thank you very much for hanging out, and I hope this was useful to you in some form. Also, thank you so much to my Patreon subscribers. I'm setting up a new names on the screen graphic, so if you want in on that when the next one goes up in March, or if you want to hear the first episode of the little Locked Tomb podcast my bestie and I are posting over there, maybe go sign up. But in the meantime, thank you so much to everybody who already has signed up on the Patreon, to anyone who supported me otherwise through the coffee or just by watching my videos all the way through to the end. I'll be back soon we'll see if I even actually take next Friday off. It's just that I have a thing next Tuesday, and so, like, I'm very stressed about it. But that either means that I'm going to dive headlong into something as soon as this is uploaded, or that I might take a few days off for the first time in a while. Thank you very much. I love you. I'll see you again soon.